The year is 1683. The gates of Europe tremble. From the east, the banners of the crescent stretch across the horizon, an ocean of tents, drums, and fear. 150,000 Ottoman soldiers stand before the walls of Vienna, the last great fortress between the Muslim world and the heart of Christian Europe. Behind those walls, barely 15,000 defenders wait in silence. Their king has fled, their food is gone. And yet, the city still breathes, one heartbeat against an empire. To the Ottomans, this is destiny fulfilled, the moment to bring Europe under the shadow of the Sultan's crescent. To the defenders, it is the final stand of a civilization that refuses to kneel. For 2 months, thunder shakes the Danube Valley. Cannons roar. The soil splits with tunnels packed with gunpowder. Nights burn red with the fire of bombardment. And somewhere beyond the horizon, another army gathers, when led by a Polish king, who believes that faith and freedom are worth more than life itself. What will decide the fate of Vienna? Numbers, cannons, or something far older, the will of men who refuse to surrender? History remembers this moment not just as a battle, but as the turning of an age. This is the Battle of Vienna. If you love epic stories that changed the world, stories where courage and conviction stood against impossible odds, join us. Subscribe and journey with us through the battles, empires, and moments that shaped our civilization. In the late 17th century, Europe stood divided, fractured by religion, politics, and ambition. The Reformation had left scars across the continent. Protestant and Catholic princes distrusted each other more than they feared the enemies beyond their borders. And while Europe quarreled, a power in the east had risen higher than any before it. The Ottoman Empire. From the deserts of Arabia to the gates of Budapest, it ruled over 3 continents. Armies marched beneath green banners inscribed with verses of the Quran. For centuries, its sultans had called themselves the defenders of Islam, heirs to Rome and Persia alike. And now, the empire's gaze turned once more toward the heart of Europe. Vienna, the city that had withstood Suleiman the Magnificent in 1529. To the Ottomans, Vienna was not just a fortress, it was a symbol. Whoever took Vienna would open the road to Germany, to Italy, perhaps even to the Atlantic itself. In the spring of 1683, Grand Vizier Kara Mustafa Pasha led one of the largest armies Europe had ever seen. A sea of men, janissaries, Sipahi cavalry, Tatar horsemen, and siege engineers marched north through the Balkans. They were disciplined, devout, and certain of divine favor. To them, this was jihad, a holy campaign to bring the light of Islam to the infidel lands. But beneath the banners of faith lay the quiet hum of politics. The Sultan in Constantinople expected glory. Kara Mustafa sought prestige, perhaps even a crown. His orders were clear: take Vienna intact, not destroyed, a jewel for the empire. That single instruction, preserve the city's beauty, would shape the fate of nations. In the other side, the Habsburg Empire was crumbling under its own weight. Emperor Leopold I fled Vienna with his court, leaving Count Ernst Rudolf to Hamburg in command. His defenders were few, barely 15,000 soldiers, including citizens, volunteers, and foreign mercenaries. Against them stood an army 10 times their number. Europe, as always, hesitated. The princes of the Holy Roman Empire feared the Ottomans, but feared each other more. To send troops was to strengthen Vienna, and by extension, the power of the emperor. The Pope, Innocent XI, saw the siege as something more than politics. It was, in his eyes, the final test of Christendom. From Rome, he called for unity. A holy league, Catholic states bound not by treaties, but by faith. Few answered. But one king did. In the north, in a land scarred by its own wars, stood John III Sobieski, King of Poland and Grand Duke of Lithuania. A soldier first, a mimic second, he had fought the Ottomans before and knew both their power and their pride. When the Pope's envoy arrived in Warsaw, Sobieski did not hesitate. If Vienna falls, he said, then so does Europe. His armies were small, his nobles reluctant, but his resolve was absolute. He began gathering men from across Poland, peasants, nobles, and his legendary Winged Hussars. They would march hundreds of miles to reach a city most had never seen, to fight for people they did not know. By midsummer, the drums of 2 civilizations echoed across the Danube. To the east, the Ottoman crescent. To the west, the botted Kris of Europe. Between them stood Vienna, the narrow bridge in which the fate of the continent balanced. The storm was coming. By July of 1683, Vienna was surrounded. From the city's bastions, the horizon had vanished, replaced by an endless sea of Ottoman tents. Smoke from thousands of campfires hung heavy over the Danube plain. The enemy was everywhere, their drums beating through the night like a second heartbeat. Inside the walls, Count Ernst Rudijevin Stahemberg faced the impossible. He had only a few thousand soldiers left fit to fight, and barely enough food to last a month. Every morning he walked the ramparts, staring down at the trenches that crept closer each day. The Ottomans dug like ants, zigzagging toward the walls, tunneling beneath the earth, packing gunpowder into the heart of the city's defenses. When the first mines exploded, the ground itself seemed to scream. Entire bastions vanished in thunder and dust. Buildings collapsed. Families huddled in cellars. Bread turned to ash. Stahemberg wrote, "If help does not come soon, we will be eaten by darkness." Outside, Grand Vizier Kara Mustafa Pasha commanded with cold patience. He refused to storm the walls outright. To him, Vienna must not be destroyed, it must be taken, whole and glorious, as proof of Ottoman supremacy. So he starved it instead. For 2 months, he tightened the noose, waiting for fear and famine to do his work. But that decision carried a price. The longer the siege lasted, the thinner his supply lines stretched. Food and feta had to travel hundreds of miles from Hungary on the Balkans. Raiding parties from local militias struck the convoys, burning wagons, killing drivers, stealing grain. The Ottoman camp began to feel the hunger that haunted the city they besieged. Still, morale in the Ottoman camp burned high. To them, this was the will of Gid. The Prophet's banner had been carried to the walls of Vienna itself. What victory could be more certain? Yet whispers spread among the Janissaries. The siege dragged in. Men grew restless. Superstition began to take root. Perhaps, they said, the city is protected by angels. Far to the north, King John III Sobieski was already marching. He had promised the Pope that he would come. And he did. 27,000 Poles moved south through fields and forests, joined by German, Bavarian, and Austrian contingents answering the Holy League's call. The king himself rode at the head, his armor gleaming beneath the August sun, his cavalry, the famed Winged Hussars, bellowing like a storm of steel and feathers. It was a march of faith and urgency. The Polish parliament had refused full funding. Sobieski paid from his own treasury, selling estates and jewels to keep his army fed. His wife, Queen Marie Casimira, sent letters from Krakow urging him to move faster, praying that he would reach Vienna before it fell. Every mile was a race against time. Scouts reported that Vienna was burning, that the defenders were near collapse. Yet the terrain slowed them, the Carpathian hills, the rivers, the heat. Men collapsed from exhaustion. Horses died. But the king pushed in. "We ride for the heart of Christendom," he told his men, "and for the soul of Poland." By early September, the coalition army reached the forests west of Vienna, the Vienna woods. From the ridges above, they could see smoke rising from the city, and beyond it, the sprawling Ottoman camp. The plain below shimmered with tents and banners, artillery lines, and thousands of soldiers. Sobieski studied the ground carefully. The Ottomans had built their defenses facing the city. Their rear toward the forest was weaker. That would be his path. He met with Duke Charles of Lorraine and the other commanders of the Holy League. They spoke different languages, wore different colors, served different masters. But for one night, they agreed to move as one. Their plan was simple and daring: attack from the hills at dawn, hit the Ottomans from behind, and strike with cavalry before sunset. In Vienna, Stahemberg's garrison saw signals from the hills, flashes of mirrors, faint trumpet calls. Hope returned to the dying city. Men who had prepared to die began sharpening their swords again. The stage was set. In the plain below, an empire waited for victory. In the woods above, an alliance prayed for a miracle. At sunrise, the wind shifted. The smoke from the Ottoman camp drifted west, revealing the walls of Vienna and the armies that would soon decide the fate of Europe. The storm was about to break. September 12, 1683. The dawn that would decide an empire. The first light crept over the ridges of the Vienna woods. Dew shimmered in the grass, and for a moment, there was silence, a deceptive calm before the greatest clash Europe had seen in centuries. Then, from the east, came the sound of drums. The Ottoman camp was stirring. For 2 months they had besieged the city, confident that victory was inevitable. The defenders were starving, their walls shattered. But as the sun rose, smoke rose too, from the hills above, where the coalition army had taken position during the night. At first, the Ottomans did not understand what they saw. The scouts had failed to detect the Allied advance through the forest. Grand Vizier Kara Mustafa believed the hills were safe. Now, as he looked up from his command tent, he saw the forest moving, lines of soldiers emerging like shadows out of the mist. 80,000 men, Poles, Austrians, Bavarians, Saxons, and volunteers from across Christendom. Flags snapped in the wind. Cannons were rolled into position. And at their head, in gilded armor, rode King John III Sobieski. The battle began before noon. The first to engage were the Imperial and German troops. They attacked along the Ottoman left, near villages like Nussdorf and Heiligenstadt. Muskets cracked. Cannons thundered. The smoke of powder covered the valley like a storm cloud. Kara Mustafa ordered his janissaries forward. These were veterans of 100 campaigns, disciplined, fierce, the pride of the empire. They counterattacked with precision, pushing the Germans back yard by yard. For a moment, it seemed the day would follow the old pattern, Christian armies breaking against Ottoman strength, as they had so many times before. But this time, something was different. Sobieski had chosen the ground carefully. His infantry held the Ottomans in the center, keeping their attention fixed in Vienna. The real blow would come from the flanks on the heights. By mid-afternoon, the sun beat down mercilessly. The fields between the hills and the Ottoman camp were churned into mud and blood. Cannon fire shook the air. Soldiers on both sides fought hand-to-hand in orchards and ruined farmhouses. Inside Vienna, the defenders heard the noise and realized help had come. Cheers rose from the walls. Stahenberg ordered a sortie, sending small detachments to attack the Ottoman siege lines from the city itself. For the first time in 2 months, the defenders were no longer prey, but part of a greater battle. Kara Mustafa saw his lines bending under pressure. He threw in reserves, Sipahi cavalry, Tatar auxiliaries, and artillery fire that hammered the ridges. Yet his biggest mistake was already made. His compound guns faced the ring direction, toward the city, net the forest. His army was split, half digging trenches, half fighting uphill against a force they had underestimated. As the afternoon dragged in, Sobieski waited. He knew that one strike too early would fail, win too late would lose the moment. His cavalry, the heart of his army, stood restless in the slopes of the Kahlenberg, 18,000 riders gleaming in the sun. Among them were 3,000 winged hussars, the most feared cavalry in Europe. When the signal came, it was a single blast of a trumpet. And the world moved. From the ridges above Vienna, the ground thundered as thousands of hooves began to descend. The cavalry came in 4 waves, Austrians and Bavarians in the left, Germans in the center, Poles in the right. Leading the charge, in silver armor and eagle-feathered wings, was Sobieski himself. Witnesses said it sounded like a mountain collapsing. The earth shook, the air filled with the roar of horses and the scream of lances slicing through wind. Down they came, through the smoke and sunlight, straight into the heart of the Ottoman lines. The janissaries tried to form ranks, but it was too late. The first impact shattered them. The second crushed their artillery positions. Horses trampled through the tents of the camp, scattering soldiers in panic. Wagons overturned. Gunpowder stores exploded. Within minutes, the entire Ottoman front dissolved into chaos. Kara Mustafa tried to rally his men, riding among them with his green banner held high. But even his own guards began to break. The camp, built for triumph, turned into a trap, a maze of fire, smoke, and fleeing soldiers. Sobieski's hussars smashed through one line, then another, driving deep into the Ottoman center. The wings caught the sunlight like hylos, the lances lowered in perfect unison. Behind them came waves of cavalry, infantry, and cheering men who had fought all day to reach this moment. From the walls of Vienna, the defenders saw the charge sweep across the plain like a tide of steel. They poured out of the gates, joining the attack, shouting prayers and war cries. As dusk fell, the Ottoman army collapsed. Tents burned, banners fell, and the once mighty host turned to flight. The Danube Valley echoed with the sound of retreat. The empire that had threatened to devour Europe was running for its life. When Sobieski rode into the Ottoman camp at sunset, the green banner of the Prophet lay abandoned in the dust. The king dismounted, crossed himself, and said simply, "We came, we saw, and gid kinked." The siege of Vienna was over. Europe was saved. Kara Mustafa escaped the battlefield, his dreams of glory consumed by smoke and shame. Weeks later, in Belgrade, a silken cord awaited him, the punishment for failure in the empire he had sworn to expand. In one day, the balance of the world had shifted. The Ottoman tide had reached its furthest mark, and from that point, it would begin to ebb. But for those who survived, there was no celebration, only silence. The fields around Vienna were littered with biddies from every faith and nation. The air smelled of powder and death. And yet, above the smoke, the bells of Vienna rang for the first time in 2 months. The sound carried across the river, across the plains, and deep into the night. A sound that told the world an empire had been stopped, and a civilization had endured. If you believe history is more than names and dates, if you believe it is the story of courage, conviction, and the choices that shaped our world, then journey with us. From the hills of Vienna to the deserts of empires, from the rise of kings to the fall of dynasties, we bring the moments when humanity stood at the edge of destiny. Subscribe, and keep walking with us through the echoes of the past, because only by remembering where we came from can we understand who we are.